Has civility and empathy been eroded from our politics today? It's a question with a divided electorate, which is timely and prudent. And if we take a moment to dive into the numbers, that assertion would be true. According to my friends over at Gallup News, a record number of U.S. adults believe that Americans are greatly divided when it comes to their most important political values, while 18% of the country believes that we're united. The percentage of people classifying the nation as divided has ticked up from 77% the last time Gallup asked this very question in 2016. And consequently, it's more than 10 points higher than when Gallup took these measures back in 2004 and 2012, respectively. With public skepticism politically on the rise, my friends, the question now becomes, how do we return to a place of healthy debate and problem solving and not political partisanship? For some answers to this very timely question, I turn to my friend Brent Giannotta. He was a CIA counterterrorism analyst from 2010 to 2015, tracking ISIS, foreign fighters, external operations, and extremist psychology. After resigning, he became an award-winning journalist. He ghostwrote op-eds for political figures which were published in the Washington Post and Foreign Policy magazine. He then transitioned to mental health, joining a psychiatric mental health crisis response team and counseling and guiding callers to the 988 crisis hotline. He left those jobs in 2024 when he was invited to join the 2024 Ticket for President Harris Walls in Pittsburgh. He joined me this week to have a conversation about the current state of play politically in America and around the world, whether Americans' reputation has been damaged over this current administration, and how best we can return to political normalcy. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, my friend, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your time as a journalist in the CIA and in politics, my friend. It's great to see you and happy Tuesday to you, my friend.
Thanks, Kevin. You too. It's great to be here. I'm honored.
Absolutely. You know, Brent, based on current events, buddy, I wanted to start by asking you about taking the temperature of what's going on in American politics and your sort of read of the situation, buddy. What do you think?
Well, it's pretty auspicious you asked me that today because of what's going on in my hometown of Los Angeles. So, the President Trump has taken control of the California National Guard without a request from a governor, which is unprecedented in the last 50 years. And now he's sending Marines in to quell protests or riots in Los Angeles. So it feels like what we're seeing is is like a big step in an authoritarian takeover of the United States. And these are scenarios that we in the United States and in Canada have only seen in history books and in very authoritarian, like famously authoritarian countries like North Korea and Russia, places like that. It's ironic that, you know, we as Americans, we have the least experience with combating authoritarianism than any country on earth. This is completely new to us. We don't have the sort of muscle reflexes. We don't have the right way of thinking about this or speaking about this. And the scary thing behind that is that we're not sure we're going to react the right way. We're going to overreact. A lot of us are going to underreact. We're going to put our heads in the sand, pretend that, oh, this is just politics as usual and this will come and go. But the fact is, like, this may not come and go. This, you know, authoritarianism, it stops the sharing of power between peoples with different viewpoints. It grinds down the gears of power sharing inside the government. It makes so elections aren't free and fair anymore. And if this is successful by Trump and his people, I mean, he could lock in, you know, Republican MAGA control of government and society for a long time. That's what I see, at least.
Yeah, I was going to follow up by asking you about the implications about the 2026 midterms because there's a real shot that the Democrats take back control of the House, my friend, and if he goes through with this experiment and it's successful, he could block the free and fair election of 2026 using the cover of sort of keeping the country safe and then blocking the election until he can get what he wants, as you mentioned. So, as you watch this from a bird's eye view, are you concerned at all about the prospects of 2026 and how the election might play out?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm terrified. There's been a debate on the podcast circuit and in newspapers and op-ed columns whether there's going to be midterm elections or not. And I think that's not really the question. There probably will be elections, but will they be free and fair? And that's what I'm really concerned about. So there's a lot of things that Trump and his administration can do to gum up the works of in the midterms. He can direct a lot of, you know, billionaire money to where he wants it to go. He can take away like media licenses for outlets he doesn't like. He can send his own people into voting booths to sort of take over and co-opt those operations. He can send out fake news about where the voting stations are going to be and when they're going to be open. I mean, there's a laundry list of things that he can do to gum up those works and to make our elections, specifically in swing states and in swing counties, not free and not fair, and just much more complicated, harder, and less fair than they've ever been. And yeah, I'm really worried about that. There's a lot of things we have to do. We have to know our rights. We have to all learn a lot better about how these things work. There is some comfort in the fact that it's a lot of little precincts who control elections in the United States. We're lucky that they're not federal. But Trump has a lot of time between now and then to federalize the operations of these things. So I'm really scared for that.
Yeah, and it goes to what you're currently working on, because I know that you're using your CIA training and your training in mental health to sort of stand up an anti-Trump movement and use the principles of empathy and compassion in politics. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about that, my friend, and the process you went through to make that decision, my friend.
Yeah, well, it all spawned from my experience on the Kamala Harris campaign last fall. So I was stationed about a half hour north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a town called McCandless. And it's a beautiful little spot. It's a nice suburb with rolling hills and nice houses and really sweet people. But the campaign from the inside, it felt like it was run like a company that had just been taken over by a private equity firm. So we as organizers were ordered by people who we never met and who never really took the time to get to know us the quotas of cold calling that we need to complete every single day. So our bosses didn't really invest in us, and the quota system of having to complete, I don't know, 150 or 200 cold calls a day trying to contact voters and recruit them as volunteers, it restricted us from investing in these voters and in these volunteers. It just made the human connection part of politics really, really difficult. And I really chafed at that. I felt that the Republican campaign machine was just trying to, send as much money as possible and, scare as much people to the voting booth as possible. And I wanted the Harris campaign to be the inverse of that. I wanted to be empathetic. I wanted to be compassionate. I wanted to sort of see the humanity in every single voter and try to, connect with them on the concerns they had in their lives. It did not feel like the campaign wanted to do that whatsoever. It was a metrics game, it was a numbers game, and it was a money game. And so, this movement that I founded with a handful of friends I met out there was to try to start exactly that. Was to try to, instead of cold calling and reaching out to voters that way, to sort of meet them on their level, to have a long conversation with them, to see what their passions were, what their fears were, and then try to figure out a spot in the movement for them to sort of fulfill their political gratification through our movement. So that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, I'm just following up on that. I'm also curious to ask you if you think the democratic apparatus is broken. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the 24 results, Trump did better, or he performed better with working class people than anyone would have suspected, my friend. And I think the Democrats, they've lost their ability to sort of talk to people on a human level. So moving forward for the Democratic Party, I'm curious if you think the apparatus is broken in terms of their communication problems. Now, we're both journalists, so we know a thing or two about communicating. So what do you think the Democrats can learn from a communication perspective moving forward?
Yes, the Democratic apparatus is completely and utterly broken. The apparatus was probably worked best 15 years ago, and it has not evolved, it's not grown, and it's not germinated in the way it needs to in the digital media age. Now, some of the reasons for that are the Democrats' fault, and some are not their fault. One thing that's not their fault is that digital media with engagement algorithms that benefits conservative viewpoints. And this is my own little thesis. If you read about a thing called moral foundations theory, it's Jonathan Haidt. He's the famous sociologist at NYU. He did this research about 20 years ago. It's really fascinating. I think it's really like pertinent to what we're going through right now. Is that each human is sort of born with certain characteristics that you could plot on a liberal to conservative spectrum. And so some people are way on one end or the other, and so a lot of people are in the middle. But if you have more conservative sort of neurochemical traits than liberal, then if you get scared or feel threatened by something, then you will be animated to combat that. It's not as strong in liberal neurochemistry. So that means that when fake news is put out on either social media or regular legacy media like Fox News or AM radio, those things are going to animate, like politically animate and anger regular listeners a lot more than the liberal stuff on the other side. And there's just like kind of nothing we can do about that. That's just based in our biology and in our evolution. So that being the case, it's contingent upon Democrats and liberals to be much more disciplined and much more united in our communication. It feels like, and Kamala Harris is a victim of this, whenever she spoke or was interviewed, it felt like she was much more concerned with not saying the wrong thing than with saying the right thing. And she was accused of word salad and just kind of rambling and not really answering questions. And it felt to me, I wonder if you feel the same way, that she didn't want to be painted as woke or as radically liberal or as socialist, and she was trying to sort of thread a needle or walk a tightrope so that she wouldn't be castigated as anything bad by swing voters. And so I feel like that strategy may have failed, and that the Democrats need to embrace much more bold policies, specifically economic policies. Don't be scared of being castigated as, for example, a socialist from right wing media, and lean into authenticity and courage, because those two things the MAGA movement does not have, and it will create a stark difference between us and them.
Yeah, and I will also add to that. I think the Democrats have to do a better job of obviously being against Trump, which they are, but they have to be for an agenda that works for working people. And I wonder your
Yes.
thoughts on how they missed the mark in the last election and how they can get back on track.
Yeah. They missed the mark because they thought that hatred and fear of Trump was going to be enough to swing the election in their favor. And what they missed was, I mean, people like me, people like you, and other people who follow politics, I mean, we're immersed in this stuff. We're reading the news every day, we're staying up on it. You and I are unique in my country and in your country. Most people don't follow politics, and I don't blame them. It's a messy game. It's super frustrating, and I totally understand people who want to check out and just consider themselves above all the messy fray. I totally get that. But it felt like the Democrats, they assume more people are into politics and paying attention to politics than they actually are. They thought that Trump's just conveyor belt of gaffes and offensive gaffes and behavior, that was going to push the whole country against him, and that's not what happened. Most of the country were focused on inflation and crime and what's going on in their own community. And so, with Biden being in office during inflation and during a time when right wing media was saying there's too much immigration, it's causing all this crime, these spikes in crime, then people who are not really paying attention are going to blame him. And they're going to say, we just want to change. And the only other game in town was Trump. And so that's what got him elected, I think.
Yeah, so what do you think the agenda has to be moving forward for the Democrats domestically so they can get back to winning elections?
They need to have an aggressive economic platform, not just an economic platform. So, in my estimation, Kamala Harris's economic platform last year was not ambitious enough. I mean, she was promising $25,000 for new home buyers. But if you're from a place where I'm from, like Los Angeles, that's a drop in the ocean. It just doesn't do that much. It's also not a systemic reform. It's like a band-aid on cancer. The problems in the United States, not only in the US, but all over the Western world, are that laws are, they serve the benefit of the already rich. So if you're rich enough to have a lot of investments, that investment profit is taxed less than if you're a worker or a laborer. I mean, that's sort of the basic statement that proves this point. And there's a million financial statutes on the books that help rich people not only stay rich but get richer, and disallow people who are starting a business or trying to work their way up a ladder from not being able to do that and sort of staying either poor or in lower sort of mid-tier socioeconomic level. What the Democrats need to do if they want to win, they need a platform that effectively communicates a way to like flip that script, to stop that system in its tracks and to rebuild it from the ground up, so that there aren't billionaires and trillionaires and then tons of poor people and people scraping by living hand to mouth. There is a way to do that. But I think the Democrats, by and large, were too terrified of being labeled a socialist. With the exception of Bernie Sanders and AOC, they were terrified of gaffing. And so they need to be courageous. They need to stop being so terrified of the media and start embracing like their own principles and really delivering, for everybody.
So I assume you're not a huge fan of the big, beautiful bill then, huh?
I'm not its biggest fan, no.
I say that in a minute, but I'm also curious to ask you about, protests because, Trump's birthday is this weekend and is planning the big $30 million birthday party for himself, complete with military honor guard and the salute. So after he's done destroying the streets of DC, I'm curious to ask you where we go from here because we have 3.5 more years of this, right? It hasn't even been 6 months, and I want to wake up from the nightmare. So tell me,
Hmm.
how do we get out of the nightmare of what we'll see this Saturday? What do you think Americans should take away from this moment?
Well, the military parade is just the most stark depiction of Trump successfully making himself into a wannabe dictator. I mean, military parades famously happen in Soviet Russia. They happen in North Korea. Like those are the images that we have in our minds when we think of a military parade of like the huge missiles, the nukes, the tanks, the marchers. I mean, these don't happen in present day England or present day Spain or democratic companies, democratic countries. So that's the first thing to take from this. The next thing is that protest is very important and very useful. So I have a Substack. It's called Sleeping Giant, and I wrote an article called "How Other Countries Oust Their Autocrats." And it turns out that protest movements that end up being successful don't have to go that long. Their average is like not it's like 7 or 9 months. But these are in other countries that have much different makeups than we do. But protest, getting out in the streets with people is going to be very important, and we can see it happening. The other thing that's important is being creative. So in Serbia, they ousted Slobodan Milosevic in 2000 by the most creative, funny, like hysterical antics that they could think of going on the streets. And that's something that we can do here in the States. Marching is great, chanting is great, music is fantastic. But if someone is looking to sort of do even more, getting together with a bunch of friends and thinking of new costumes or thinking of new chants or new music or just like viral moments to put on social media that are creatively against Musk or against Trump's children or against little things that they find in the media. That creativity is going to push these protests to the next level because now we've had a lot of protests. We're going to have the No Kings rally on June 14th, but it sure feels like not a lot is changing. It feels like Trump is just a steamroller that is not being stopped or slowed down at all. And I don't want people to feel that way. I want my countrymen and countrywomen to feel like what they're doing is having some effect and being really creative, even more creative and ambitious in protest is going to help do that.
Yeah, and just before I asked you about your time in the CIA and the Obama administration, I'm also curious to ask you about Trump's healthcare and spending bill because, as you know, Brent, I have cerebral palsy and I also live in Canada, but I also have dual citizenship. I'm also in the States a lot because I do public speaking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And under Trump, all of those sort of efforts have been somewhat diminished. So I'm going to ask you a two-part question about the health care for the 14 million Americans or so that will be without health care if this bill goes through. But I also wanted to ask you about the employment of folks with disabilities and how this will have a dramatic effect on them if this bill goes through, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, as you said, I haven't read it line for line, but like most people, I'm relying on smart people that I follow in the media and on podcasts and the news to sort of break it down for me. And so, as we know from Trump's just personality, he doesn't seem to hold disabled communities in high regard at all. He doesn't seem to place any premium on statutes that protect from discrimination or boost healthcare from people who need it the most. And so I would not expect this bill or any other bill passed by the Trump administration to help those things. And in fact, they're going to hurt those things. And a lot of the 14 million people who are at threat of being kicked off of healthcare do have disabilities. And I mean, nothing this administration has ever done or said suggests that that is going to be a hobby horse for them, that they're going to come to disabled communities' aid in lieu of these huge Medicare cuts, which is incredibly sad. But I mean, the upshot is potentially that states themselves are going to have to get more creative with how they care for low income and disabled communities in their states. So, California, where I'm from, has a pretty good healthcare market, open market. I find the prices to be much more reasonable than Nevada, where I currently live. So that's one thing. I think a lot of people are going to move to Canada and move to Europe to try to find greener pastures and more compassionate places for whatever healthcare needs they had. I hate to be such a Debbie Downer, but it feels like it's going to be a really bad 3.5 years for people who have really high healthcare needs, unfortunately.
Absolutely, my friend. And I know that your background is in mental health, as we mentioned earlier, and you spent some time in the Obama administration and served as a counterterrorism analyst, my friend. And I know that you've also written op-eds for the LA Times and the Washington Post on domestic radicalization and national security, my friend. So I'm curious on how those experiences have affected you, and under this current administration, do you think the national security of the states is at risk, and the reputation of the country is at risk as well? What are your thoughts there?
Great question. So I started at the CIA in 2010. So for history buffs, that's when the drawdown of coalition forces was happening inside Iraq. What was also about to happen a year and a half later was the Arab Spring and the Syrian civil war. So Syria erupts into war, and the remnants of Al Qaeda in Iraq were hiding out in northern Iraq. They surged across the border into Syria. They became ISIS, and then they took over the sort of opposition fight against the state leadership there in Syria. And so when I popped out of analyst training, this is going to be early 2012, I was given a couple assignments. One, I was supposed to monitor ISIS's ability to strike the West. And the other thing I was supposed to do was try to explain to the Obama administration why somebody would leave a beautiful city like Paris or London or Berlin to travel to Syria, to an impoverished war zone in a desert to join a terrorist group and potentially die. Like, sort of, what is the psychology that motivates that decision to happen? Now, I was 31 years old at the time, and I had never taken a psychology course in my life. I was an international relations major in undergrad, and then I got a graduate degree in Middle East studies. So no psych whatsoever. But I had to somehow get read up on basic psychology as quickly as possible. And luckily, the US government has a lot of resources for me to do that. So I read all that stuff, and then I examined the people I was following in the ISIS movement, and I realized they all had a lot of stuff in common. They all had really bad home lives. They really struggled to get jobs, to hold down girlfriends and get married. They struggled to sort of connect with people they wanted to connect with and develop a life that made them proud and made other people proud of them. A lot of them had resorted to petty theft. They'd spent time in prison, places like France and Belgium and Holland. These were troubled people, and they all had YouTube addiction. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them were just devouring ISIS propaganda at night. And so when you're seeing something over and over and over again, you start to believe it's true. That's just how the human mind works. And so I wrote up a long paper on sort of the 17 different reasons somebody would join a terrorist group. So it's sort of creating a community that they lacked back home. It's creating a sense of purpose. We had this saying that said, by leaving Europe and joining ISIS in Syria, you could take yourself from the fringes of society to the center of world events. And that really felt like it was true because from what 2012 to 2013 or 2015, ISIS was kind of on the front page of most newspapers almost every day. And it was like the major thing going on in the world. And so, I mean, over 80,000 people left to go join that group. And so I spent multiple years trying to figure out, like, what is this? How is this group convincing all these people to make this decision that is totally wild to most people? And so I resigned in 2015 for a million reasons. And then when January 6th happened, and I'm following the reporting from the Capitol, I mean, I could see in the eyes of the rioters that they had the same fury and anger that my ISIS targets had. They had, similar to ISIS, they had been radicalized online through QAnon posts and fake news, stuff that doesn't exist in the real world. It only exists online. That they came together, they found the community they really wanted, and they expressed their just furious agency on the US government. So these things, to me, are one and the same. It's one is international radicalization, one is domestic radicalization, but it's all a psychological weakness that is being quelled and mollified by just simple good versus evil narratives on digital media that pulled, thousands of people to come commit violence and property destruction. This is a really, really important concept for our national security apparatus to understand. And to get to the last part of your question, Trump's national security does not want to understand that, and they don't want to counteract it. They see domestic right-wing radicalization as a tool to use and to deploy on their own behalf. Mm-hmm. They are also taking all the focus away from threats from China or Iran or North Korea in terms of nukes, in terms of biohacking, cybersecurity, Russia marching into the rest of Eastern Europe. They're pulling a lot of resources away from that to domestic issues that will help Trump politically and help him in the media. So it's a lack of focus on the most salient threats. It's politicizing the national security apparatus. It's pushing a lot of the most talented and principled federal workers out into the private sector. It's gutting the State Department and the military of anybody who will speak truth to power, as we say. Will tell Trump that there's this thing that is really important that you don't care about yet, but you should. Like, that is going to happen less and less and less over the next 3 years. And this is exactly how we become vulnerable to a major, major attack, potentially like 9/11, and potentially way, way worse than that.
Yeah, and one thing that worries me, because if this happens in America, Canadians will also be affected, is that there are really any guardrails in this administration, because he's surrounded himself with people both in his administration and in Congress who are afraid to sort of levy up to him and follow the Constitution. So I'm curious to ask you if you view Trump as a national security risk, particularly because of the people that he has currently running both the CIA and the Defense Department. It doesn't seem like there are sort of checks and balances. We know that there aren't many in the Republican-led Congress. So I'm curious, do you think Trump is a national security threat? And what do you think about the guardrails that may or may not exist, my friend.
Yeah, Trump is the largest, most serious national security threat to the United States since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we've already seen Trump's destruction and his mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. A study at UCLA estimated that if he hadn't have politicized the wearing of masks and the getting of vaccines, he could have prevented approximately 400,000 lives from being lost. I mean, that's a much bigger death toll than Al Qaeda or ISIS ever inflicted on American citizens. So, I mean, it sounds absurd to say that Trump is more dangerous than China, Iran, North Korea. But if they never escalate to nuclear war, then it's not even close. Uh, Trump he's a raging narcissist. It's raging so much that his brain can't see and digest threats that are outside of what benefits him directly. He just can't. He doesn't have that capability. And the whole national security apparatus is built around using thousands and thousands of workers, one that I used to be, to not only find those threats, but to analyze like what the level is, and then convey that threat level to people with power to sort of stop it or quell it. And so the people who are on my level, the analysts, a lot of them are leaving, and a lot of them are being replaced with people who they're not there to protect American citizens. They're there to protect Trump. And then when they write the analysis and then send it to the White House, National Security Council, the military, or the State Department, the people receiving those reports are incentivized to suppress anything that Trump doesn't really want to read or hear or see. And so there are multiple sort of cracks in the facade. And one of my op-eds in the LA Times was about the intelligence failure around October 7th in Israel, the Hamas attack into Israel. Bibi Netanyahu had for years done the same, enacted the same process in the Israel national security apparatus that Trump is starting to enact right now. And this is just like puts the finest point possible on like the more and longer you politicize a national security apparatus, the more vulnerable everybody becomes. And that's exactly what I see as happening.
Yeah, and Brad, for the last half of this interview, I want to break it up into two domestic questions and then two national security questions. So the first one of these final sort of quad of questions is this, my friend. I'm curious to ask you, who do you currently think is the leader of the Democratic Party? And do you think the Democrats have to get sort of more on the level of practical people with their messaging? I know we talked about that earlier, but who do you currently think is the leader of the Democratic Party, and how do we get more people to run that aren't traditional politicians that could make a difference in the sort of the ecosystem of America? What are your thoughts there?
I believe the current standard bearer of the Democratic Party is Pete Buttigieg. I think it's nobody else. It's not Kamala Harris because she hasn't emerged as sort of a leader in these very troubled times that is rallying protest energy and rallying sort of hard thinking energy toward correcting our problems and making us better. She's on her own path, and I wish her the best. But I don't believe anyone sees that type of leadership from her right now. I love Gretchen Whitmer, but she really miscalculated in dealing with Trump. I mean, she was heisted into standing next to him while he was announcing some very unpopular things. That was just a bad miscalculation by her and her team. Gavin Newsom, he's got a ton of really bad baggage, and he's also started a podcast where he's settling up with a lot of MAGA characters. He's trying to reach across the aisle, but I don't think that is going to call anybody into supporting him. It's not going to build the kind of big tent that he's hoping to build around him. Josh Shapiro, he's fantastic. Got a lot of great energy, but I find him being a very retail mid politician. When he speaks, it's very curated, and it's not the level of ambition or courage that anyone's looking for at this moment in time. The only person that demonstrates that courage, that intellect, and that ambition is Pete Buttigieg. So he's courageous because he goes on right wing outlets, and he wins debates every single time. He's not beholden to an office right now where he has to worry about a constituency like a current governor would. He's kind of this free agent, freelancing out there. He's got a great head on his shoulders. He's smarter than all of us combined. And I think that following him would be really advantageous to the Democratic Party. As far as getting young people into politics, I'm not sure the answer to that question because, and this is a stereotype, but young people are, especially Gen Z, I mean, they're the most digital generation that the world has ever seen. And a lot of them are just, I mean, a larger percentage of their lives is sort of motivated by what is going on online. So whether it be TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, I mean, those places, they only have sort of knockdown, drag out, bloody knuckle politics. It makes politics look terrible, a lot more terrible than it actually is. Politics, according to de Tocqueville, is communities getting together and figure out their problems in a room together. It's a really beautiful and elegant way to coexist in a society. But young people don't see that, and it's a real shame. And so, I mean, people like you and I, we can preach to them all we want, but are they going to hear our message? And are they going to digest our message in lieu of all the other messages that they're getting millions of times a day? I honestly don't know the answer to that one. That's the toughest question I think we have in front of us right now.
Yeah, and from a national security perspective, whether it be the ongoing war of Russia and Ukraine and the tariffs he's got with Canada, which is one of the U.S.'s largest trading partners. I'm curious, as you look at the world today, what do you think is the biggest national security threat as we go through the second Trump administration?
Mm-hmm. Man, it's tough to pick. I think way near the top of the list is going to be another pandemic because, I mean, hardly a day goes by here in the States without news of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. firing a huge team of experts from pandemic response teams, from vaccination contracts. I mean, he's just gutting all the people that we built up to try to make sure that 1 million people don't die during the next pandemic. And there's an outbreak of measles in Texas and Arkansas. There's an outbreak of bird flu. And I haven't read about these because just the onslaught of news is like, it's tough to keep up with. But the people who do keep up with these things and monitor these things for a living and are more qualified to do it than I am, I mean, they're out of a job. They're not working in public service anymore because they're not valued by this administration. So a pandemic that is potentially even more deadly than COVID was. We might have been really lucky to only lose 1 million Americans during COVID. I mean, pandemics before COVID, they killed a lot more people than that. So that's way up near the top of the list. Number 2 is like a low-grade civil war in the United States. I mean, if you think about what's going on in Los Angeles right now, a lot of really smart people, David Frum, Tom Nichols, they're saying that Trump wants this to happen. He's not quelling the violence because the violence and the disturbing images on TV and online, those help him. They help his narrative of that there's too much violence for him not to send in troops and to take over troop brigades and to push the Marines here and there. And if those thinkers are right, and I think they are, he's going to want this to keep going in every city, in Minneapolis, in Austin, in Nashville, in DC, in wherever he can get these clicks because he's an online president. I mean, his instincts perfectly align with the incentive structures of social media and digital media and our sort of outrage right-wing ecosphere. It's this perfect marriage of outrage, and he can keep half of America so angry as to keep, to not elect Democrats ever again. So that's a really big national security threat. And number three, sort of dovetailing off my expertise is in terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you read about Osama bin Laden, he was motivated by two major events. One is the early strife between Israel and Palestine in the 80s and 90s, the first Intifada in 89. Um, and then the Operation Desert Storm in 1990 and 91, where George Bush sent the U.S. Army to kick the Iraqi army out of Kuwait and and to protect the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. So Osama bin Laden was living in Saudi Arabia at the time, and he was a younger man, and he was so incensed that the Saudi government would get in bed with the U.S. government to combat Saddam Hussein. That is why he he radicalized, started Al Qaeda, and became what we call a far enemy jihadist. And so Operation Desert Storm started in August 1990, and 9/11 was in September 2001. So that's 11 years. And I say all that just to put a point on the fact that the biggest terrorist attacks take a long time to plan, and they will. I mean, these guys take the long view. We in the States and capitalist nations, we don't take the long view. It's all about short-term gains and short-term benefits. But we are dealing with an enemy that thinks totally differently than us. They will wait us out. They will wait till we are vulnerable. They don't need to strike tomorrow or the next day to get clicks. So if I was Al Qaeda, I would look at what the U.S. is letting Israel do to the Palestinians. I will look at the trip that Trump took to Saudi Arabia to get in bed with the Qataris and the other Gulf Emirates who are abusing their own people. And I would think, and then I would look at what Trump is doing to the national security apparatus in the West and think there's never been a better time to strike the United States since 9/11 than now. I think we're more vulnerable to attack than we were pre 9/11 because we're completely taking our eye off the ball. We're allocating tons of resources away from actual threats into the threats that Trump invents in his own brain to help his own brand. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Russia could march into Poland, where my ancestors are from. China could march into Taiwan. And I don't have any trust that Trump or his inner circle would handle those situations in a delicate manner with like the delicate touch that those things require to stave off nuclear holocaust. I mean, he's a 0 to 100 kind of guy. He threatens and then he backs off and then he threatens again. He's not a diplomat. He has no respect for diplomacy, for sort of shuttle diplomacy and having lower tier analysts and diplomats sort of smooth things over so that the state leaders can sort of have their own sort of media fight while not having things escalate to the point where lots of people die. Trump doesn't operate that way. He wants to control everything himself. And he has a behavioral disorder that allows him to, it forces him to put all of us in super grave danger. So yeah, the next 3.5 years are going to be really delicate for us. And I don't know what more we can do than just pray that nothing terrible happens.
Move to Canada. No.
Move to Canada, yeah.
No,
plug.
yes. No, I have one more question for you, but there's one question, before I get to that, there's one thing that's really been bugging me since the end of the 2024 election. You know, there was a lot of talk about the cognitive ability of Joe Biden to serve another 4 years. And you look at everything Trump has done, and no one's calling into question, at least the people that have the power now to do anything about it, about Trump's cognitive ability. And I'm just curious, where are the leaders in the legislative branch that are looking, the constitutional scholars who are Republicans, uh, who would be traditional constitutionalists, and they're just sitting on their hands because they're afraid of Trump. But if you look at the cognitive decisions that he's made over the past 6 months, I tend to think we might have been better off with what we had, as opposed to what we have now. And I wonder your thoughts on the cognitive ability of Trump, and the irony about how the other side of the aisle was so up in arms about Biden, but they won't say anything about Trump when it comes to this regard. And I just wonder your thoughts there.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. The irony is at a painful level, especially for me. I was interviewed during the Biden campaign, and then I was eventually hired when Kamala Harris was the nominee. So I was prepared to support either candidate because I knew back then, as I do now, that either of those people, even in massive cognitive decline, would be better than Trump would be. I mean, Sam Harris, the podcaster, he said something that was really inflammatory. He said Trump is effectively evil. Like, if you define what evil is, you could say a phrase like it's aggravating the suffering of others for your own benefit. That could be like a definition of evil. And I think there's a great argument that's exactly what Trump does pretty much every day and twice on Tuesdays. One of the major problems is that conservative leaders and liberal leaders are judged on different scales. They're not a fair. People don't judge them the same way. Like, we had this big debate once Hillary Clinton got into the race back in 2016, that people would ask her different questions than they would ask a man, like about what she was wearing or about her family life, that male politicians never got. So there was a very legitimate debate about, are we treating male and female candidates differently? We are also treating liberal and conservative candidates differently. So on the liberal side of things, people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they exude a pretense of holding true to virtue and to their principles. And so people hold them accountable, those, as they should. But Trump doesn't exude that pretense at all. You can kind of see, like, any human can dissect his personality and his psychology and realize that he's really out for himself and for people who are just like him. So people are not holding him to principle. Well, people try to. Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, is famous for calling out right-wing hypocrisy. And that hypocrisy is not a mistake. It's not an error on the right side of the political spectrum. It's part of their arsenal. So saying one thing and then doing another from a Republican politician nowadays it gets so many clicks and so much anger from liberals like me that it's almost worth it to do it as much as possible because it's a political weapon. It's not something to be embarrassed about anymore. So yes, it's ironic that Trump has major psychological problems, for which Biden was deemed unfit for the presidency, but these are essentially comparing apples and oranges. People don't judge liberals and conservatives differently. They expect different things from them. That's exactly what they're getting.
Absolutely. And Brad, I can't thank you enough for your time, my friend, and I want to get you out of here on this question. When we talk about priorities moving forward and preserving democracy as we go into the midterms and ultimately to 2028, how do you think we can encourage people to stay invested in politics? Because one of the reasons Vice President Harris didn't win is more than 10 million Democrats didn't vote in the last election because they didn't think their vote mattered. So as we move forward, I'm curious to end by asking you, what do you think the average American can do to really get invested in this process? And what do you think priorities should be for the next 3.5 years for people who want to restore democracy? What are your thoughts there?
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that we can all do. Number one, I would say, is to stay informed. So some people go to the news sites, some people go to podcasts, some people go to social media. I think it's important to go to all of them. So Instagram has been great for keeping abreast of what's happening on the ground in Los Angeles. But then on the other side of the spectrum, reading long thought pieces like in the New Yorker or in the Atlantic or New York Times or Wall Street Journal, those are also really important to stay fully informed about what is going on, what laws and norms are being violated, what the smartest thinkers like constitutional scholars and lawyers believe is the real threat to our system, and what we can eventually do to fix things. So like staying informed is number one. Number two is realizing that like this is not normal, that things are not guaranteed to just sort of snap back to where they were before, that there is a serious, serious threat to, yes, American democracy, to liberty, to civil rights, but just our way of life. So I've been lucky enough to live in developing countries. I lived in Egypt, I lived in Lebanon, and places like them. You can't get anything done without bribing somebody. And luckily in the US and Canada, we don't really have that to nearly the extent, but authoritarian governments tend to make societies like that, where if you are in an out group, you don't get anything that you want. If you're pulled over, you're not, the police doesn't decide, like, did you violate a law or not? They decide, are you in the in group or the out group? Like, does my tribe want to protect you, or are you a threat to my tribe? Like, that is what is going to decide who gets fined for things, who gets speeding tickets, who goes to jail, who spends more years in prison rather than less. That is the type of society that we are at threat of having foisted upon us because of this. Like, this is not democracy as usual. This is not just another party gain power and we're going to have elections and then we're going to swing back the other way. Like, part of the Trump playbook is to make sure that power never swings back to liberal Democrats ever again. So that's number two. Number three is to, engage in sort of like make the energy to improve society part of one's life. Now, going to a protest every 6 weeks, that's fantastic. Posting on social media once a week, that's also fantastic. But the reason to protest is not just to compel political change, it's also to make life better while you're trying to invoke that change. So what I mean by that is, like, when you go to a protest, don't go alone. Like, recruit a friend, a family member, like create a crew where you have a community that is protesting together and that is sort of united in their understanding of the threat that we're all facing and in the activities that they all want to do and feel gratified by, to sort of show their greater community their agency. Like, getting out there and marching and chanting and making signs and dressing up in costumes, it makes people feel good. It makes people feel like in their darkest moments, when everything feels like it's on fire and in chaos, that they do have some power. That when they do something that is caught on a phone and put online, that powerful people are going to take notice, that they're going to change their behavior just a little bit. That's part of one's everyday life and not just something they do once every 6 weeks. So a couple things that are going to be really important in the years ahead are knowing the law. So anyone in a position to do so, go to law school. That'd be like a really great thing. We just need more lawyers that are honed during a time when this is a 5-alarm fire, and hopefully they're going to be learning the law with all of this at the front of mind. And the last thing I'll say is to become writers. Take a writing class, take creative writing, take nonfiction, take op-ed editorial writing, and take memoir writing. These types of experiences, I've done a ton of them. Not only do they feel like group therapy, where you have to really like pour what is in your brain and in your heart onto a page, share it with people around you and have them comment and then work at it, improve it and tweak it and hone it, that is like, that is almost a spiritual experience that just really helps everybody like get even better grounded during like really bad times like this. But the better a writer you become, the more poignant what you write is going to be, and the more compelling it's going to be to audiences who read what you write, either just in a random Instagram post or in an article that you pitch to your local newspaper. So getting writing chops and going through that process of honing that skill is one of the best things that any of us, literally any of us, if you're 9 years old or 9 years old, any of us can do to help one's propensity to help combat this regime and then pull our democracy back from the brink.
So we should tell Linda McMahon there's value in education. No, I'm only
Yes.
kidding.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Good Lord.
That's another subject for another day. But Brent, I really want
Seriously.
to thank you for your time and perspective on a whole range of issues. I hope you enjoyed our wide-ranging conversation, and I want to thank you for the good work that you're doing to invest in this process and to get more people invested in the politics around them, my friend. It was a real pleasure to meet you and have you on the show, my friend. I want to thank you for your time and contribution and for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
It was such a pleasure to be here with you, Kevin. You're fantastic at what you do. Your questions are great. You're paying so much attention, and you've got an incredible mouthpiece. I'm so glad that you're using it for good.
Fabulous. And just before I let you go, my friend, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at Brent Giannotta on LinkedIn and Facebook, but I would love for people to subscribe to my Substack, which is Sleeping Giant. I'm posting weekly articles on things that I think are really important, things that I'm not seeing in the media, and that is where all my energy is going right now. So subscribing to Sleeping Giant would be fantastic.